In this video, I'm going to talk to you about rig length. There are various different schools of thought on this, and there are all sorts of parameters that can play an influence when choosing how long a rig should be for each situation. We're going to start by having a chat about short rigs. So I've tied up one of my old classics actually. It's the double bottom bait inline rig. In terms of rig length, this is about as short as I would go. One of the most confusing things about rig length is that basically everyone kind of measures them a bit differently. It doesn't really matter how you measure it as long as you're consistent. So if you measure rigs from the eye of the hook to the base of the lead, then this is 12 centimetres, just over 4.5 inches. If you measure rigs from the bottom of the bait, we've got 17 centimetres or 6.5 inches. So depending on whether you're fishing singles and doubles and what size bait you use, it can make a massive difference, of course. When I'm talking about rig length, I talk in terms of the distance between the eye to the base of the lead. So this is a 4.5 inch rig. One factor to consider when we're choosing rig length is what materials are we going to use. I've tied this up in a heavy braid. This is 35 pound armour link. It could be 15 pound, could be 25 pound. It really doesn't matter. If I want to create a short rig, I normally always use braid. It would have to be very special circumstances for me to use a mono or a coated material. A short braided rig like this is perfect for when you're solid PVA bag fishing, and I've used this rig just like this an awful lot when I've been doing that type of work. The other time I'd use a short braided rig like this is if I know that the fish are feeding heavily in the silt and I just want to drop a rig on a spot with some bait, and I don't mind if the lead actually sinks somewhat into the silt. Even if that leg plugs 2 or 3 inches into the silt there, that rig's going to be sat down there on top, very nice, very presentable, and the fish will find it. It might seem counterintuitive to have a short rig fished in the silt like this, but actually it works really well. The fish are very happy to bury their head into the silt looking for food, so a supple braided rig like this, even if it's buried, as long as you've got some attraction around the spot, either in the form of a PVA bag or a grubbing mix that you've spread over the top, they will find this. And a soft, supple, short braided rig like this is very effective for that type of situation. Another situation in which I'd use a short, supple rig like this would be dropping from a bait boat. It's any situation where you're creating a tight pile of bait over the rig. Spooning rigs out would be another example that would be very suitable. The fish aren't going to be moving very far between food items. They're going to be coming in, they're going to be moving fairly close to the deck, and they're not going to be picking up individual baits and then upending. They're going to be moving around, and a shorter rig will just give you more chance at getting that pickup. The other factor to consider, what size and shape of carp are you looking for? Now carp, as we know, come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, from 4 pound to 40 pound. And you've got different body shapes, you've got long ones, you've got short and fat ones, there's all sorts of variety. Different size and shape of carp will feed a little bit differently. If you imagine a big deep bodied mirror, now that mouth has got to go from that point there and angle all the way down to the deck. That's a fair old distance. That's easy 10-12 inches on a decent sized fish. If I was fishing a short little braided rig like this, perhaps over a spread of baits, where the carp is coming down, he's picking up that one and he's got to move over there, he's got to have that one, move over there and have that one, etc. He's got to tilt and angle down to pick up that one. He's then going to come horizontal, move across, tilt down again, move up, move across, tilt down again. If he comes across this little rig, his mouth is still going to be angled downwards. And what I've found for deep bodied fish is that if the rig is too short and it hits them where the mouth is angled down like that, they find it easier to eject. If you've got a tight baiting scenario, then you've got much more chance with a fish like that, but certainly not over a spread of baits. If you're fishing for slimmer bodied torpedo-like fish, like a common, the body, even on a decent sized common, it might only be that big. The mouth is going to be sat, generally speaking, much closer to the deck anyway. Therefore, he hasn't got to angle down as far. A short, supple braided rig like this for smaller, slim bodied fish is going to work really well. Their mouth is going to be in a horizontal position when it hits that rig, and when the mouth is flat, they're going to find it much harder to eject that rig because they're going to try and spit it out that way, and the mouth is not angled down, so you've got a better chance of hooking them. When I first came to France, I was very accustomed to fishing with very short rigs. Some of my rigs might have only been that long, 2.5 inches, something like that. What I found was that I regularly got done by the fish. I'd have a flurry of beeps and I wind in, nothing there. So what I did to solve this problem is I just added a couple of inches to the length of the rig, and I started converting those short flurry of beeps into a proper take. If you're fishing a water and you're catching regularly enough but you don't seem to be getting amongst the better fish, the one thing that I would say is that I would add an extra couple of inches onto your rigs. Okay, let's have a chat about medium length rigs. What I've done here, I've just done a simple mono hair rig with the shock and run system. If I line the hooks up at the same distance, I can see that we've got about 30mm difference in the actual length of the rig, but we haven't, because this is an inline rig and the inline rig comes into effect at that point there. If I pick up this shock and run rig, we get a very, very slight effect at this point here, but we really don't get the full effect of that lead until that point. So if I pick those two up and put them side by side, you can see that there's a massive difference as to when the hook is going to come into effect. I'd say there's at least 10 centimeters difference there. There might only be 30mm difference in the finished rig length, but because one is on an inline rig and one is on my shock and run system, we've got a few extra bits and pieces in there. It makes a big difference to the mechanics of the rig. The choice of lead system has a massive role to play in when the hook is going to come into play in the carp's mouth. So it's really important to factor this into the equation. It's no good saying, well, I'm just going to make all my rigs at that and then think that I'm going to fish it with an inline rig and then I'm going to fish a swivel rig and it's going to work the same. It's not. It's going to be completely different. So this is the sort of rig length that I call a medium length rig. So if I put the 0 as the eye of the hook, if we take the effective length as being the end of the rig, because it's not going to come into effect until that point, it comes out to be about 25 centimeters, 9.5 inches, something like that. So at 9.5 inches, my medium length rig is about twice as long as my short rig. If I wanted to fish a medium length rig with an inline rig, I'd have to make this supple braided rig a lot longer. So if we talk about rig length in terms of effective rig length rather than just how long the hook link actually is, then a medium length rig for me is between 8 and 10 inches. And to be honest, that's the length I choose for 90% of my fishing. For me, it's a good all-round length. It works with a little PVA bag or stick. It works over a spread of baits. And I even find it works when I'm fishing over a bed of bait. So I have a lot of confidence in rigs of this length, and it's just the length that I end up choosing most of the time, and most of the time it works. To finish up, I want to talk to you about long rigs. So I've made up one of my long rigs here, and I use this rig for specific situations. It's the sort of rig I use when I'm fishing large French public waters, tend to be fishing at range. There's some very big fish resident in these lakes, It's also the sort of length of rig that I fish with on the river. I also use rigs of this length when I'm targeting the cats, but I'd use something like Armour Link for its abrasion resistance rather than just this mono. I tend to always use a big bait. This is a 24mm hardened hooker and it's a big old donkey choker. Because my public water fishing is done at range, I've put on one of my big 4.5 ounce hex distance leads there, and as you can see on this shock and run system, it's a much longer setup than it would be if I just put a little pear lead on there. The difference between the medium rig here and the log rig, it's about 5 centimeters. So again, we're not talking a massive amount, but I'm going to hold these two up side by side and you can see the overall result is a considerably longer rig. So there we go, that's those rigs side by side. That's engaging the full weight of the lead, and we've got at least 10 centimeters difference between when the hook would kick in between these two rigs, despite the fact that one is only 5 centimeters longer than the other. So all of these things add up, all of these things make a difference to the actual effective rig length. So from the eye of the hook to the swivel knot, we've got 23 centimeters or 9 inches, but if I offer up the length of the lead there, we're off the scale, 32, 33, about 34 centimeters. So that's in excess of 13 inches. If you measure your rig length, including the size of the bait, if I offer up that 24mm there, so the eye of the hook is at least 4 centimeters away. So the actual size of the bait has added some rig length as well. In terms of baiting approach for a long rig, I've done an awful lot of single bait fishing, especially on the big public reservoirs with this rig. And the reason I do that is that the fish are out at range and I need to cast it an awful long way and I just can't get bait out that far. I think a long rig works very well in this situation because I'm just looking for a passing fish. It's just going to come down, going to find that bait, pick up the rig and he's done. If the situation allows and I can put a spread of baits over this rig, then yeah, I would do that and it works great. But I'm not talking about fishing it over a spod mix, I'm talking about throwing stick style, big wide spread of baits. I might be baiting an area 50 meters wide. So the carp are coming in, they're moving perhaps many meters between baits, and a big rig like this is going to work a treat.